The village of Driftwood Cove sat at the edge of the world, or so it felt. Waves crashed endlessly against jagged cliffs, their spray licking the stones like hungry tongues. The cries of gulls mingled with the low whispers of old sailors' tales, carried on the wind like secrets best left unspoken. Here, the sea ruled everything, its storms a reminder of its unrelenting power, its rare moments of calm, of fleeting grace. At the heart of the village, an ancient inn leaned against the wind, its timbers groaning with age. Inside, villagers gathered in uneasy silence by the hearth, their words low and deliberate. They spoke of a thing, a presence, they called the Lantern Man. "Don't follow the light," muttered old Ewan, his gnarled fingers wrapped around a mug of ale. His voice was like gravel grinding underfoot. "That light'll make you see things, things you wish you hadn't." Across the table, Peter, a wiry young man with haunted eyes, shivered. "My uncle saw it once, said the lantern knew what he wanted, knew his mind. He followed it." Peter trailed off, glancing toward the door. Rain rattled the shutters like restless fingers. "He never came back." The others nodded grimly, their faces hollowed by the firelight. At a nearby table, Clara Haywood, a journalist with ink-stained fingers and a head full of questions, set her teacup down with a sharp clink. "You're all telling ghost stories like children." Her voice cut through the room like a blade. Ewan glared at her, his milky eyes narrowing. "You think we'd make something like this up, Missy? The Lantern Man's as real as the tide." "Or as real as your excuses for drunkards falling into the sea," Clara countered, leaning back in her chair. "It's just folklore, a way to keep people in line." "Believe what you like," Ewan snapped, rising from his chair with a groan. "But if you see that light, you'd better pray you're smarter than the others." The room fell silent as the old man shuffled into the night. Clara returned to her notebook, her pen scratching across the page. She had come to Driftwood Cove for a story, something to expose the ways superstition clung to the edges of modern life. But a flicker of curiosity tugged at her skepticism. The days in Driftwood Cove passed like the tide, slow and heavy. Clara spent them wandering the narrow, salt-stained streets, her notebook in hand, pressing the villagers for more about the Lantern Man. Most turned her away, their faces drawn tight with unease. Only one seemed willing to talk. Marjorie, an elderly woman with hands weathered by years of mending nets, ran a small stall by the docks, selling charms and talismans. "You're not from here," she said one morning, handing Clara a steaming cup of tea that smelled faintly of brine. "You don't know what the sea can do." "I'm trying to learn," Clara replied, flipping open her notebook. "Tell me about the Lantern Man." Marjorie's hands stilled over her work. For a moment, the air seemed heavier, the waves beyond the docks crashing louder. "What do you want to know?" "For starters, why would anyone follow him? Surely they'd know better." The old woman laughed, low and humorless. "It's easy to say that when the lantern's far away, but when you see it up close, it's not just a light. It's a promise." "A promise of what?" Marjorie's gaze sharpened, cutting through Clara's skepticism. "Whatever you want most. Answers. Forgiveness. A way out of your pain." She paused, her voice softer now. "Haven't you ever wanted something so badly you'd risk anything to get it?" Clara faltered, caught off guard by the question. "Number, I don't believe in magic or promises from shadows." Marjorie shrugged, turning back to her nets. "That's what they all say, until the lantern finds them." The storm arrived that night, howling and relentless. Rain lashed against the windows of Clara's rented room at the inn, the candlelight casting restless shadows on the walls. She sat at the desk, her notebook open but untouched. Hours of interviews and theories had led her nowhere. The Lantern Man was just a story, A boogeyman conjured from fear and coincidence. That's what she told herself over and over. And yet, a flicker of light appeared on the horizon. She froze, dismissing it as lightning. But the light didn't fade. It hovered, steady and golden, against the black expanse of the shoreline. It moved slowly, almost deliberately, swaying like a ship's lantern caught in the tide. Her pulse quickened. It's a fisherman, she thought. Someone out late on the water. But deep down, she knew better. The light grew brighter, impossibly so, casting rippling gold across the waves. It wasn't natural. Clara rose from her chair, her chest tight. The villagers' warnings rang in her ears. Don't follow it! But her curiosity burned hotter than her fear. She grabbed her coat and flashlight, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the door. Outside, the storm hit her like a wall. Rain slashed at her skin, and the wind tore at her hair, but she pressed on, following the golden light. The beach was treacherous, the rocks slick with seawater. The lantern bobbed ahead, always just out of reach. It led her to the edge of the shore, where the waves clawed hungrily at the rocks. The light stopped, hovering above the tide like a beacon. Her heart pounded as she stepped closer. "Hello?" she called, her voice swallowed by the wind. A shadow shifted beyond the light. Slowly, a figure emerged, a cloaked silhouette, its form blending with the storm. The lantern dangled from its hand, the glow casting eerie ripples across the rain-soaked stones. Clara froze. The figure didn't move, its hooded face, or lack of one, hidden in shadow. The light tilted slightly, spilling golden rays across the ground. Shapes began to form in the glow, faint at first, then sharper. She saw herself as a child, standing in her father's study, clutching a crumpled letter. His face was stern, his voice cold as he told her to leave. The memory shifted, and she was older, sitting alone in her apartment, surrounded by unopened letters from her sister. The images came faster now, cutting into her like broken glass. Her father's funeral, her sister's tear-streaked face, the empty desk where her dreams once lived. "No," she whispered, stumbling back. "This isn't real." The figure stepped forward, impossibly smooth, as if gliding over the rocks. "Stop!" Clara's voice cracked, but the figure didn't waver. The lantern tilted further, the light flooding her vision. Her legs buckled, and she fell to her knees, her mind drowning in the memories. As Clara's mind spiraled through the broken shards of her past, the lantern's glow shifted. The sharp edges of memory softened, melting into something warmer, something impossibly comforting. The storm's howl faded into a low hum, and the rain seemed to evaporate, leaving her skin dry and warm. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer on the beach. She stood in her childhood home, the familiar scent of lavender and old books wrapping around her like a blanket. The worn armchair by the fire crackled with warmth, and her father sat in it, smiling at her. A soft, genuine smile she hadn't seen in years. "Clara, my star," he said, his voice rich with affection. "Come, sit with me. Tell me everything you've seen." Her breath caught. "Dad?" He nodded, patting the chair beside him. It felt so real, his voice, the way the light from the fire danced in his eyes. Her feet moved without thought, carrying her to his side. She sank into the chair, her trembling hand reaching for his. It was solid, warm, alive. Tears welled up in her eyes. "I've missed you." "I never left," he said softly, squeezing her hand. "I've been waiting for you to find your way back." Her throat tightened, her words catching. This was what she had wanted for so long, a chance to hear his voice again, to feel his love without the shadow of disappointment hanging over them. But even as her heart swelled, a flicker of doubt sparked in her mind. This wasn't possible. Her father seemed to sense it. "It's okay," he said gently. "You've worked so hard, Clara. Sacrificed so much. You deserve this." As his words washed over her, the scene shifted. She was in a bright newsroom now, her desk piled with papers. She recognized the bylines. Hers. Clara Haywood, investigative journalist. The articles were bold, groundbreaking, the kind she had always dreamed of writing. Around her, colleagues bustled, nodding to her with respect. "You did it," a voice said. She turned to see her younger self, bright-eyed and full of ambition. "You followed the truth. Look where it got you." Clara's heart ached with longing. This was everything she'd worked for, everything she'd lost sight of in the years of struggle and rejection. The scene shifted again, and she was sitting at a table in a sunlit cafe. Across from her was her sister, laughing as she stirred her coffee. The years of silence and missed opportunities between them melted away, replaced by easy conversation and shared memories. "You were always my hero, Clara," her sister said, her eyes shining with warmth. "I just wanted you to know that." It was perfect. Too perfect. The doubts grew louder now, the corners of the scenes flickering like the edges of a dream. "Is this real?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The golden glow returned, spreading across the cafe. The figures around her stilled, their movements slowing as though caught in syrup. Her sister's smile froze, and her father's voice echoed faintly in her mind. "You deserve this." Clara turned, the golden light flooding her vision once more. The lantern man's figure emerged again, the hooded silhouette standing at the edge of her fabricated reality. "Isn't this what you wish for?" a voice asked, smooth and melodic, like wind over water. It came from nowhere and everywhere all at once. "What you want most?" Clara's heart pounded. She wanted to say yes, to step into the warmth and never leave. But a part of her resisted, pulling against the perfect images. "It's not real," she murmured, clutching her arms. "It could be." The voice was calm, patient. "This is your chance, Clara. Everything you've ever wanted, right here. A life without regret. A life without pain." Her mind wavered, the temptation heavy in her chest. But something about the glow, the way it pressed in, the way it pulled her so eagerly, felt wrong. "What's the price?" she asked, her voice shaking. The lantern man didn't answer. Instead, the golden light flickered, and for a brief moment, Clara saw herself reflected in it. But her reflection wasn't smiling. It was hollow, the light in her eyes extinguished. Her stomach twisted. "What's the price?" she demanded again. The figure tilted the lantern, and the dream shattered. The newsroom, the cafe, her father, all dissolved into mist, leaving her kneeling once more on the jagged shoreline. Rain pelted her skin, and the storm howled around her. The lantern man stood before her, the glow of the lantern dimming. "You already know," the voice said softly. Clara staggered to her feet, her chest heaving. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but she knew. The price was her. Her mind, her very soul. Whatever it was that made her her. The lantern man offered the lantern, holding it out as if inviting her to take it. Clara's breath caught in her throat as the lantern man extended the lantern toward her, its golden light flickering like the last remnants of a dying star. Her mind raced, desperate to find the words to refuse, to flee. But the weight of the storm, the crashing waves, and the silence pressing down on her made it impossible to think clearly. She wanted to look away, to run, but something in her, the same part that had always craved validation, that had driven her to succeed, to search for meaning, pulled her forward. The light whispered to her, soft and hypnotic, a lullaby promising peace, clarity, and resolution. "Just take it." Her hand trembled, reaching for the lantern. The warmth radiated from it, beckoning her like a lover's embrace. She could almost feel the weight of all the things she had lost. Her father, her sister, her dreams, lifting from her shoulders, replaced by something comforting, something whole. But then, as her fingers brushed the cool metal of the lantern's handle, she saw it, the reflection. Not her reflection, but someone else's. Someone she didn't recognize. Someone whose face was as blank and empty as the void. It stared back at her with hollow, soulless eyes. The reflection was not hers. It was a twisted, fractured version of herself, a dark echo of what she could become. Her breath hitched, and the world around her distorted, warping like a nightmare on the edge of waking. The once gentle glow from the lantern began to grow harsh, searing her vision with brightness so blinding she could no longer see. The air tasted of ash, the salt of the sea replaced by something more bitter, more metallic. Her hand froze, suspended in mid-air, the lantern just inches away from her grasp. What would I become? Clara jerked back, stumbling away from the figure, the lantern still hovering in front of her, waiting. Her mind churned, the broken pieces of her past crashing against each other, each memory now distorted, painted in the cold light of truth. She had been searching for something, some kind of closure, some way to make everything right again. But this wasn't the answer. It was never meant to be. The lantern flickered again, and with it, something else. The faintest whisper of the past. A voice, familiar and loved, but wrong. Clara. Her father's voice, but it wasn't warm. It wasn't loving. It was empty, hollow, distant. Clara closed her eyes, clutching her head as the weight of the false memories crushed down on her. She could see them all, her father, her sister, her ambitions, her failures, layered, stacked upon one another, each one dissolving into the next like a series of dreams upon waking. The lantern man spoke again, his voice now clear, without malice, but tinged with something far more terrifying. You were never meant to find what you wanted, Clara, because it wasn't there, within your reach. It never was. Her legs gave out beneath her, and so she fell once more, her body meeting the unyielding, jagged rocks. The wind howled. The storm raged around her, but all she could hear now was the terrible stillness, the crushing realization that everything she had sought had been a lie. The lantern's light, the promises, the false hope. It was all part of the same twisted trick. Let it go, the creature murmured, its form blurring at the edges. The price has already been paid. Her heart stopped, and suddenly the world began to spin. The shoreline, the rocks, the sea, they all warped into a maelstrom of light and sound, as if the very fabric of reality was coming undone. The lantern flickered one final time, and the golden light erupted outward, engulfing everything. Clara screamed, but no sound came from her mouth. The last thing she saw before everything shattered into oblivion was the lantern man's figure, still standing, the empty lantern swaying gently in his hand, as if the whole of the world was nothing more than a fragile illusion, a story, a tale to be told and forgotten. The light consumed her, and then nothing. In the village of Driftwood Cove, when the storm finally passed, the beach was quiet again. Clara never returned, and in the village of Driftwood Cove, where the sea whispered its secrets and the storms never truly ended, a new story was added to the old ones. A story of a woman who had chased the light and found nothing but darkness. But still, the lantern remained on the beach, its glow now just a faint shimmer in the moonlight, as though it had never truly been alive. The storm had passed, the chaos and the visions fading into the distance, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. The villagers, none the wiser to what had occurred that night, went about their lives, but there would always be whispers of the storm that had come and gone, of the lantern that flickered in the dark. And as the tide slowly claimed the lantern, inch by inch, the world seemed to breathe again, though it would never be the same. For in Driftwood Cove, there were stories that never ended, tales that wound their way through time, lingering in the corners of the heart like a memory too painful to forget. The Lantern Man's light was gone, but his mark, as elusive as the waves, would remain forever, hidden in the folds of the storm's passing. Some things, Clara had learned, were never meant to be found, but they always managed to find you.